It's that scary time of year again. In addition to the fun frights, this year is full of all too real scares related to health, the economy, and possibly your financial future. What can you do to lessen these fears? It's that time again to tune out the hype and focus on the facts. Facts that matter to you, the income generation. Let's get started. Get ready to separate reality from myth.
Joining me right now is Sound Income Strategies founder and CEO David Scranton.
They've created a new type of inflation, and although markets have always been an emotional place, they seem to be even more of an emotional place these days.
Jeffrey Small, market watcher, is with me.
Stock market dynamic is getting ready to significantly change.
So let's bring in our co-host, Jeff Small, president of Arbor Financial Services, and also the brand ambassador for the Retirement Income Store. Let's face it, in addition to being something that we all look forward to, retirement can actually be a scary prospect. It carries lots of questions and lots of uncertainty, and people worry about whether they'll be ready for it both financially and mentally. That's why every Halloween season we do a show devoted to some of the issues and questions that tend to scare people the most. This year's a little different because the coronavirus crisis has upended virtually every aspect of our lives, raising new issues that retirees and near retirees are grappling with. We'll address those issues on today's show and share some guidance to help you make them a lot less scary. We'll also identify some of the biggest potential mistakes to avoid as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to fuel economic uncertainty. Joining me and my co-host Jeff Small will be author and public speaker Ed Slott. We'll also hear from Kentucky-based financial advisor Tim Sparks, as well as Connecticut-based advisor, right in my backyard, Andrew Agemy. Before we bring in Ed Slott, let's talk about one of the scariest questions this crisis has raised for a number of Americans. And that is, does my retirement timeline need to change? According to a recent report by economists from 3 universities, the COVID-19 pandemic has already fueled a surge in early retirements. According to this report, the number of people declaring themselves retired rose by 7% in the first few months of the pandemic when the biggest surge of layoffs hit. Nearly half of this group were aged 50 to 65, but the largest increase was among people over the age of 60. The report concluded this is probably since age 65 is when retirement incentives kick in, like Medicare. Additionally, the prospect of getting maximum Social Security benefits is only a few years away. On the flip side, according to a survey by TD Ameritrade, many other workers, including 37% of baby boomers, are saying they believe they'll have to delay retirement as a result of the pandemic. Others, who haven't determined whether COVID-19 will affect their retirement timeline, are struggling nervously with this question. So what makes the issue so scary is just how many unknown factors there still are related to the pandemic. When exactly will life return to normal, and what will the new normal look like? What will the ultimate toll be for the economy and the financial markets? And most importantly, how might it affect retirement accounts, world travel, cruise ships, resorts, and a host of other industries and issues? Now, if you're a regular viewer, you know that I talk a lot about the importance of having specific retirement goals. However, goal setting is clearly challenging now with so many factors related to retirement shrouded in uncertainty. And that said, there are some things that you can do to help minimize your fear and to keep your retirement plans on track as you grapple with these scary new issues. One is to avoid making any retirement decision rashly or emotionally. In other words, don't let fear drive your decision making. If you planned on retiring soon, but feel you should put it off because you're afraid of how the pandemic will ultimately impact your retirement accounts, explore the issue. Explore it thoroughly with the help of your advisor. Don't simply change your timeline based upon fear. Putting off retirement might be the right call, but with the right strategy, it might also be possible to stick to your original timeline. By the same token, don't let fear cripple you from making any decisions or taking any action at all. It can be tempting in the middle of so much uncertainty to shrug your shoulders and say, what's the point? And that's understandable. But here's the fact. It's actually more important than ever before to revisit, to review, and possibly revise your financial strategy in times of economic turmoil and economic uncertainty. Think of it like sailing in rough seas. Sure, it's tempting just to hold tight and to wait for the storm to settle. But your odds of staying afloat and reaching your destination are much better if you stay at the helm. And we'll be talking more about that coming up in just a bit. Right now, let's welcome my co-host, Jeff Small, president of Arbor Financial Services, a retirement income store located in Melbourne, Florida. Jeff is also our brand ambassador for our very own retirement income store and Amazon best-selling author of the book, Turning Financial Planning Right Side Up. We also want to welcome a good friend of the income generation, author, public speaker, Ed Slott. Ed was named the best source for IRA advice by the Wall Street Journal, and he's also been called America's IRA expert by Mutual Funds magazine. Ed's a good friend of the income generation once again, and we're happy to have him back. Ed, Thank you.
Great to be here, David. Thank you.
So what are some of the scariest things that you're hearing today from people who are worried, whether they're worried about the election, they're worried about the COVID-19 crisis, those that are retired or nearing retirement?
Well, I think number one is the panic about today's situation. And part of the scary things is that people are, I think, running too fast to raid their retirement accounts. We had this CARES Act and it lets you take money out. And a lot of people think this is free money. First of all, it's not free money. It's your own money. You're raiding your own retirement. Yes, you may have situations as a result of the pandemic, lost income, illness, whatever it is, but your retirement savings should be the absolute last resort. You should look to any other money, and it's taxable. The only real break on these, what they call these coronavirus related distributions, is that you don't have to pay the 10% early withdrawal penalty if you're under 59 and a half, and you could spread the income over 3 years and even pay it back, which is not bad. But it shouldn't be your first inclination to say, oh, this is great, let me grab my retirement money, because history shows us that most people who take that money end up not being able to pay the tax, because let's say they take 10,000 out. If they need it that bad, they spend it. Then next year, it'd be worse than Halloween when they see that tax return and they say, but I already spent that money. I don't have the money for the tax now, and I don't have money to repay it. They're too quick on the draw for the retirement savings. And Congress had a good idea by providing relief, but it should only be a last resort. That should be the last place to go, your retirement savings, because it's the hardest to replace.
Well, people have to realize that, they're only getting maybe 70 cents on a dollar, whereas they could have had an entire dollar sitting there compounding, growing for their retirement. So it's an expensive proposition even after the CARES Act. Jeff?
Yeah, I know it's a very expensive proposition. I don't think that folks are really utilizing the CARES Act correctly, though, Ed. You're exactly right. But I want to throw you a curveball, Ed. You are the nation's foremost IRA expert. You get more publicity on knowing IRAs. I need clarification. Our viewers, our audience, our listeners need clarification. Why we don't put IRAs in trusts? Or do we put IRAs in trusts? Can you give us the pro and con on that in about a minute?
All right, in a minute, you never do it. First of all, it's the wrong terminology you have there. You never put an IRA in trust. I think what you mean, should you leave your IRA to a trust? Because if you put it in trust during your lifetime, you're taking the money out, it's gone. You don't have an IRA anymore. It's all taxable. I think the question you're asking is instead, should you leave it to a trust?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, all right. Now, why does anybody use a trust? You know why? My definition of a trust, when do you use a trust? When you don't trust, because if you trusted them, you wouldn't need a trust. So I call it a don't trust. That's when you use a trust, when you don't trust. When you're worried about, you could have a large IRA, maybe $1 million, and it took you a long time to earn that and build it up. And the last thing you want it to go to your children and grandchildren, but you don't want them squandering it or losing it to creditors, bankruptcy, lawsuits, second marriages, divorce, a whole host of items. So for those reasons, for protection and control post-death, that's when you might want to leave your IRA to a trust. But under the new Secure Act rules, even most of those trusts will the money will have to be paid out within 10 years after death. And
Right, so essentially, Ed, it doesn't do any good these days because, again, the money's got to come out. You can't run the money from the grave. So, Ed, we need to take a quick commercial break. We need to leave it there, but we want you to stick around. I want to have you right back in a minute. You stay with us, too. We'll be back here in a moment, coming up on the income generation. We'll be right back. I'm David Scranton. When it came time for my mom to retire, one simple mistake forced her to work years longer than she should have. And that's why I started the Retirement Income Store, to help hardworking Americans 55 and over plan for the retirement they deserve. I couldn't help my mom, but maybe I can help you.
If you're 55 or older, please claim our free Retirement Income Kit. Chock full of information you need to know to get steady income during your retirement. Call 866-314-7227. Online at theretirementincomeStore.com.
One of the main reasons that people might be wondering whether they need to revisit their retirement timeline is actually due to another scary question raised by the pandemic. And that does, or could, this crisis put my savings at risk? The short answer to that question is possibly. The more accurate answer is that it depends upon a whole bunch of factors, the main ones being your individual situation and how your retirement accounts are allocated. Obviously, this crisis has impacted virtually every aspect of the financial markets. In fact, it put the brakes on a full decade of fairly consistent stock market growth, sinking the markets by nearly 40% back in March. While two of the three major indices have since managed to surpass their peaks from before the pandemic, volatility returned to Wall Street in a big way in September. And it's likely to go on as the pandemic continues to rattle the economy, especially with a highly contentious presidential election adding to the uncertainty. Now, does this mean that if your retirement accounts are all invested in the stock market, they're automatically at risk? Well, not necessarily. It depends, again, on a variety of factors. One of those is whether you're still invested in growth-based strategies in the stock market or whether you made the shift to an income-based strategy focused on dividends. This can be a somewhat less risky and more effective approach to staying in the stock market, if that's your choice. Of course, this applies to people who are retired or within 10 years or so of retirement. You see, with this approach, you have steady income coming in through the form of dividends, which lowers your potential risk of spending down your principal in order to meet your income needs. This, as I talk about frequently, can be a very slippery slope that gets steeper every time the market takes another big dip. And if you're a regular viewer, you know there are many other options for decreasing the fear factor over the potential impact of this pandemic on your retirement accounts. They all start with making that strategic shift from growth to income. As we discussed at length on another recent show, some insurance company-based, income-based investments are also contract-based, designed to help protect your principal while generating guaranteed income. That contract can be especially comforting and scary in uncertain times like these. Right now, let's bring in my good friend and co-host, Jeff Small, along with a good friend of the income generation and today's guest, author and public speaker, Ed Slott. So Ed, you were about to make a point there when I talked about the fact that, gee, if it's got to come out from an IRA and pay taxes over 10 years, then you really can't run the money from the grave in these things you call don't trusts. And how about the tax rates when the money is in the trust?
Right. In other words, the funds have to be taxed and go into the trust by the end of the 10 years after death. But in certain trusts, the funds can stay in there and be protected, but then they're taxed at high trust tax rates. One of the solutions there is to do a Roth conversion now. And if you want both the low taxes and the trust protection, do a Roth conversion now and leave that Roth to a trust. But again, you're using the trust for generally personal non-tax reasons, post-death control, and to make sure that money is protected for the beneficiaries and from them.
Yeah, case in point, Ed, I've got a situation I'm dealing with 3 trustees from a benefactor's estate. None of the trustees get along. The money's in a trust right now. and they don't know what to do. And so what, as a fiduciary and advisor, can we do to help facilitate maybe the movement of that money? And what are the legalities of moving that money into another custodian? Are we able to do that?
Well, if it's IRA funds, it can only be moved by a trustee to trustee transfer, a direct transfer. Now, just as an aside, after this Secure Act, which is in effect right now, most people don't even realize that because they're so focused on the pandemic. But many people might be better off without that 10-year rule, turning the IRAs, and that's not for everybody, but replacing it with life insurance, exchanging bad assets for good assets. I don't sell insurance, but if you need the trust protection, the life insurance going into a trust is a much more flexible asset to use in a trust. You don't have all the complex trust tax rules, no RMDs, and no taxes.
Well, Ed, that is such a great point, and I know you've started to talk more about this publicly, but why hasn't that caught fire? Because that option for life insurance, for converting a taxable asset into a tax-free asset, has been there forever. Why don't folks embrace that more?
I've been talking about, as you said, it's been in my books forever, but now with the Secure Act, I think all Congress did is incentivize us all to do the better planning we should have been doing all along. I mean, if you do that plan, you get everything every client of mine ever wanted. 3 things: larger inheritances, more post-death control, and less tax. Who cares how you get there? The IRA is no longer the vehicle. It has become a bad asset to use for estate planning, which is exactly what Congress wanted. So let's get rid of that jalopy and switch to a life insurance limo for the rest of the ride.
Good point. Ed, speaking about Congress, what do you think Congress needs to do at this point, where they're all wrestling about the second version of a CARES Act? If you were sitting there, what would you propose?
I would have them get more money into individuals' hands. People need money. I'm no expert on all of this. I'm a tax guy, but there's no question they should keep going with the unemployment insurance benefits. People are desperate for that money. And when you put money in people's hands that need the money, they will spend it. And that's been generating growth in the economy, even in light of the pandemic. They're so worried about billions here and billions here to these other industries. But they won't survive, these industries, unless people have money in their hands to be able to buy things that they need. I'm not always that way because you don't want a free-for-all, but these are unusual times and people need more help than ever before. People are not working because they don't want to work. They're not working because the jobs are gone and some may never come back.
So people have money in their hands, so they don't have to worry about all the basics that they need. Now, when you get past that level, in the last 2 minutes, tell our viewers and our listeners, please, what you think are the most important things they need to focus on if they're part of the income generation to get past this point so they can still reach their long-term retirement goals.
Well, it always comes down, there are books on all of this, but every book on saving for retirement or having income comes down to 2 things: earn more, create more, earn more, and spend less. It's math. That's always going to come down. If our government knew that, we wouldn't have these giant budget deficits. You can't spend what you don't have.
Okay. And today, in terms of tax-deferred plans, what's the best advice for them in terms of determining which tax-deferred plans should they focus on? Should they be maxing out the 401k? Should they be doing a Roth IRA? What's your best advice in the final minute on this segment?
I don't even like tax deferred anymore. IRAs or 401ks, everything should be piled into tax-free vehicles like Roth IRAs and Roth 401ks, because it's the only hedge against the uncertainty of what future higher rates can do to your retirement savings. Plus, in a low tax rate environment, the cost of converting to a Roth or losing the deduction is not as big of a cost. But nobody wants a big tax bill later on in retirement when the paychecks stop and they're the most vulnerable. Now, in a low tax rate environment, deductions aren't even worth as much. I say go Roth and go tax-free, or use the life insurance plan I talked about. But whatever you do, you have to start building tax-free as a hedge, a shelter against future higher taxes. The day is coming. We just don't know when.
Yeah, I find so many people that put all their money in a 401k, and now when they get into retirement, They can't even buy a car without having to take a withdrawal from their 401k and paying all the taxes. So at bare minimum, people need to be balanced in the taxation types of their accounts. So Ed, thanks so much. As usual, it's been our pleasure having you.
Okay, thanks.
And thank you too for watching, but stay with us. We have a lot more coming up right here on The Income Generation. We'll be right back. I'm David Scranton. During my career, I found that most baby boomers have done a great job growing their retirement savings, yet many don't know how to convert their savings into steady income. And that is why I built the Retirement Income Store, to help hardworking Americans preserve their assets and establish steady streams of income.
If you're 55 or older, our free retirement income kit is for you. It's chock full of information you need to know to get steady income during your retirement. Call 866-710-1749. Online at theretirementincomestore.com.
The Income Generation is now available on YouTube. Subscribe to The Income Generation so you never miss a show. You can watch all your favorite episodes now in one place, as well as catch up with your favorite financial guests. Subscribe now to The Income Generation, only on YouTube.
Mazes and fun houses are popular attractions at this time of year, and part of the fun is not knowing exactly what's around the next corner. While that is fun when it comes to Halloween attractions, it's not so fun when it comes to real life. Unfortunately, that's very much how most Americans are feeling right now, fearful about what could be waiting around the next corner. With that fear comes an instinctive urge to move cautiously and to avoid taking any missteps or wrong turns. So what are some of those potential missteps? Well, we've already mentioned the danger of making rash or impulsive decisions based upon fear. We also discussed becoming paralyzed by fear and taking no action at all. Here are some other potential dangers to watch out for. 1. Stalling your automatic investments. If you regularly have money from your paycheck going straight into your retirement accounts, it can be tempting to want to suspend that during a period of great uncertainty. But it might not be the right decision, depending upon your age, stage of life, and individual situation. Number 2, withdrawing unnecessary funds from a 401k. That move may also be tempting right now because with the CARES Act, they've suspended the 10% tax penalty typically applied to withdrawals before age 59.5, provided the withdrawal is coronavirus related. Now, while this rule change is meant to provide financial help for those who truly need it, an early withdrawal for many simply isn't the best option. Number 3, reverting to cash. With so much fear and uncertainty, it may be tempting to liquidate and sell investments and hunker down with cash until the economy and markets are more stable. However, before using cash as a safe haven, it's important to look at your overall allocation. Now, some cash, of course, is good, but sitting 100% in cash as a safety move can be damaging, especially when you consider today's near zero interest rates and the effects of inflation over time. Finally, the biggest potential misstep to avoid in these scary times is not revisiting, not reviewing, and not potentially revising your retirement plan with the help of the right qualified financial advisor. In my experience, that means someone who specializes in retirement income. Now let's welcome back my good friend and co-host, Jeff Small. So Jeff, I got from that Ed Slott thought it was a good idea to take money from your 401k because we can do it penalty-free. Did I interpret that properly?
Well, I think if you're strapped, if you're unemployed, you're under 59 and a half, the CARES Act is what Ed had said that allows you to pull that money out to carry yourself. But he cautioned that with, listen, don't raid your retirement accounts, because if you raid those accounts, it might take years, if ever, being able to replenish that money that you've taken out. And so there's a delicate balance there, Dave, and it's scary for a lot of folks out there that have to do that.
Jeff, you're too serious today. You're not playing with me, having fun like I was hoping you would. But I'm a little surprised because, one thing that he is a fan of is getting more into tax-free things like Roth IRAs. So I guess he's right. If you're going to take it out and spend it, that's an issue. But if you convert to a Roth IRA, by definition, there is no 10% penalty. You just pay the tax and convert to a Roth IRA. So I thought that was good advice, because I don't know about you, but I see that thing I mentioned to him all the time where somebody is so lopsided toward IRAs and 401ks that when they retire, they can't buy a car, they can't pay for a year's tuition for one of their grandchildren without pulling the money out of the 401k and paying all the taxes on it. And that's not good either, right? You need to have a balance between taxable and tax-free, don't you?
Well, you do, but most people will work their entire life, Dave, and stuff as much money into pre-tax environments like 401ks and traditional IRAs as possible. And so it's very common for us to see 90% plus of somebody's assets all invested in pre-tax earnings. And what Ed was alluding to was the fact that, instead of having this tax time bomb and leaving it in something that's taxable to everybody, is to convert that slowly, quickly, or over time, because over the long term, you're going to end up paying less in tax at today's rates, and even more, you'll probably pay much less in tax if rates go up in the future.
Yeah, and especially, today, a couple can earn just about $100,000 even taking the standard deduction and still only be in the 12% federal marginal bracket. So if somebody's making less than that, maybe because they had some work interruption this year with the COVID crisis, it might be a great chance to do some of those conversions at 12%. And even if you're out of that bracket, you're at 22%, that's still a pretty good bracket. If you've saved enough for retirement, you're probably not going to retire in a lower bracket. Because isn't that one of the biggest myths we hear all the time? Well, when I retire, I'm going to be in a lower tax bracket. But that only applies if you didn't plan well enough for retirement, right?
Well, they are in a little bit lower of a tax bracket, Dave. They don't have payroll tax anymore. They don't have Medicare tax anymore. Their income, if it's less than what they were earning before, so they're saving all across the board on all three forms of taxes. But speaking of Roth conversions, coming back to that for a minute, this is a great year for our viewers to take their required minimum distributions that got waived and do what? Stick it into a Roth, Dave. This is a great time for them to do that and start building that tax-deferred aspect of the Roth, but the ability to pull it out tax-free, unlike their IRAs.
You're right. You can't take an RMD, a required minimum distribution, and convert it to a Roth IRA. But if you take a similar amount this year, it's not called an RMD, and you're absolutely correct. You can make that transition. So I think that's a great important point. But another point is for some people, the answer might just be slightly reducing their 401k contribution. Certainly want to max out the employer match, but if you slightly reduce it and save a little bit of money after tax dollars into something else, even if just a few years before retirement, now you have some time to get your balance sheet a little more balanced so it's not all 401k lopsided, correct?
Yeah, you really have to have some after-tax assets, something for a safety net, some type of non-IRA, non-401k producing asset that you've got some savings when you retire in addition to those pre-tax assets through 401ks or IRAs, because it's very common for us to see that imbalance. But most folks, Dave, they're strapped. They save as much as possible in their 401k. They live off of everything else to have a quality of life. But you got to have that balance there. You're exactly correct.
Yeah. So two things I want our viewers and our listeners to be aware of also. Some 401ks allow after-tax contributions. And when they go to roll those 401ks over to an IRA upon retirement, as you and I agree that most should do, they can usually pull that after-tax money out. Once it gets pushed over to an IRA, they can no longer pull it out without tax implications. So you can pull some of that tax money out. So you could even use your 401k in some situations to build some after-tax money. But last resort, if you can't do it, if you get to retirement, at the brink of retirement right now, you're going to retire at the end of the year and it's all 401k loaded, it's all pre-tax, then at bare minimum, before you retire, go get approved for a home equity line of credit. It's not the optimal, but at least that way there, if you need to buy a car, you can take it against that home equity line of credit and then pay it back in increments so you're not paying tax on a huge lump sum withdrawal. So we need to take a quick commercial break. Stay with us. There's much more to come here with Jeff Small and Dave Scranton on The Income Generation. We'll be right back.
David J. Scranton's groundbreaking new book, The Retirement Income Story, will revolutionize the way baby boomers and their advisors plan and save for retirement. The Retirement Income Story, the story behind the launch of the Retirement Income Store, is about to shatter many of the myths Wall Street bankers have promoted and protected for decades. David outlines what he believes to be a much better method for planning and saving for retirement, one that doesn't involve taking on more stock market risk. In fact, most will be able to reduce and or possibly even eliminate stock market risk while creating renewable streams of income they can count on well into their retirement years. The simple truth is that if you were born in 1968 or sooner, you can't afford to ride out another catastrophic stock market drop like the ones in 2000 and 2007. Read The Retirement Income Story and revolutionize the way you plan and save for retirement.
I'm David Scranton. When it came time for my mom to retire, one simple mistake forced her to work years longer than she should have. And that's why I started the Retirement Income Store, to help hardworking Americans 55 and over plan for the retirement they deserve. I couldn't help my mom, but maybe I can help you.
If you're 55 or older, please claim our free Retirement Income Kit. Chock full of information you need to know to get steady income during your retirement. Call 866-314-7227. Online at theretirementincomestore.com.
For behind-the-scenes photos, retirement planning tips, and upcoming giveaways, follow The Income Generation Show on Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch video clips, guest interviews, and to catch up on past episodes.
Perhaps the most important thing to keep in mind when going through a period of economic uncertainty or struggling with scary financial questions is this. The goal is not just to get through the scary times, but to put yourself in a good place for when they finally end. Remember, they will be over at some point. America has endured plenty of scares in the past, including a global pandemic, world wars, and major economic crises, including one just over a decade ago. Typically, our society is permanently changed in some ways after these events, and that certainly will be the case at the end of this crisis. However, there will be an end to it. In the meantime, it's important to avoid missteps and wrong turns, and not to let fear paralyze you or scare you into making rash decisions. It's just as important to maintain a strategy that puts you in a position to take advantage of potential new opportunities. For example, I talked earlier about the value of shifting your strategic focus from capital gains to dividends if you want to stay in the stock market. As noted, the right portfolio of actively managed high dividend yielding stocks can, among other things, provide a hedge against spending down your principal during the crisis. In addition, be aware that if the market should drop by, let's say, 20% or more, with the right strategy and the right advisor, you could be well positioned to purchase more value-based higher yielding stocks at bargain prices. This could give you some upside potential for growth in addition to reliable income. Here's the bottom line. It's not just about survival during scary times, it's about strategy. Now let's bring back in my good friend, Jeff Small, as well as another very good friend, Andrew Agemy, founder and CEO of Agemy Financial Strategies, a retirement income store located in Guilford, Connecticut. Andrew, thanks for being here.
Hey, my pleasure. It's always good to be here.
So what are some of the scariest things that people are approaching you with today? You're there, grassroots with the boots on, talking to folks every day, members of the income generation. What are some of the things they're most concerned about today, especially in light of this crazy COVID-19 crisis?
My clients don't have any concerns because that's why they're my clients, right? But here's the biggest concern is the Fed and the government. What's the government going to do? The elections coming up, that kind of thing. But the people who are not yet my clients, who are out there and getting ready to retire, their concern I see is retiring and staying retired, which rightly so. Their parents used to be able to live off of dividends and interest and have incomes that they needed that lasted all their lives. And their concern is, this is their concern. That's why they're coming in to see us, because they're wanting to make sure that they have what they need for the rest of their life.
But before they're your client, Andrew, before, not after, but before, when What are their concerns? What are they worried about? What are they conveying to you? Because a lot of times I find that people don't know what to ask, do they?
Right, exactly. People don't know what they don't know. And that's what I find so much is the problem with people who are getting ready to retire. They think it's going to be a de-saving, withdrawing from their retirement account. And my son Daniel calls that de-saving. He came up with this term. Interesting, right? Because they're just withdrawing. But the problem is that they don't know what they don't know. So there's a myriad of options that are available to people where they can be set up in a better situation than what they currently are, but they don't know it, and they don't ask the questions.
Well, don't you find, Andrew, that when people come into your office, they have no idea what their income is going to be? They haven't figured that out yet because nobody has shown them how, and they're tentative, and they're leery, and they're scared at the same time because they don't know what their retirement journey is going to be like. I mean, and that's why you say when they become a client, they don't have any worries, right?
Right, exactly. Here's the best way to describe that. Retirement is a mountain that people are climbing up their whole life. When they get to the top of the mountain, with snow-capped covered mountain, it's scary, right? They're looking over the edge. Things are changing. Their paycheck is changing. Their friends are changing. Everything's changing. At the top of the mountain, many times they get up in a 2-seater sports car. But at the top of the mountain, I say, do you really want to come down that mountain in a 2-seater sports car, or would you rather have an all-wheel drive SUV driven by a professional driver that's been there before at no extra cost? Hey, what's better than that?
So Andrew, I've got to ask you this, and we have about 45 seconds left. As a minister, you're always coaching people about being positive. What do you tell people today about, in all this uncertainty, what they need to do to keep a positive mindset when it comes to their retirement?
Great question. Take a walk, breathe, right? Gratefulness is the first part for gratefulness for what they have. And another thing would be finding the right coach, the right mentor, the right income specialist that's going to help them to be able to have the income that they need and specializes in that for the rest of their life. I mean, if you have a leak in your house, you're not going to call the carpenter to fix the leak in your plumbing in your house. You're going to call a plumber. So they be able to find the right income specialist to help them have the income they need.
And gratitude is great advice. Gratitude helps put people in the right mindset all the time. So Andrew, thanks so much for being here with us today. We appreciate it, of course. And you stay with us too. We have much more to come here on The Income Generation. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Income Generation. I'm Dave Scranton. Of course, I'm here with Jeff Small, as well as our good friend and guest, Tim Sparks, founder and president of Sparks Financial Group, a retirement income store located in Lexington, Kentucky. He's also host of the Retirement Income Show, a radio show, airing Saturdays at 12 p.m. Eastern on WVLK 590 AM. Tim, you are an income generation version. Thanks so much for being here as part of the show.
Nice being here. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so we're talking, of course, about Halloween and some of the scary stuff that happens in Halloween. But what are some of the things that you find people are coming into your office every single day that they're most scared about with this whole COVID-19 crisis?
Well, as of recently, as a matter of fact, I just got a phone call just the other day from the radio show, and it might have been because I had brought it up on the show about the elections. And I think a lot of people are very nervous about the elections right now. If Biden gets in, we have a change of leadership. Is there going to be tax changes, both individual and corporations? And they can see the stock market spiraling down. So that we believe that is a big concern from what we're hearing today from the majority of the people that I work with.
Interesting. Jeff?
You know, Tim, you have a great voice. I bet your people are really responding to your radio show really well because you could probably do voiceover. Your voice is so commanding. But you're right. The political side of the equation is scary. Folks are concerned about that. And you know what's interesting, Tim, is nobody is bringing that up in the media or in the news or in advertising for these campaigns. People in general feel scared by the Democrats. And what they're terrified of is a blue wave. And then, of course, spiraling taxation, which would, of course, hurt the economy, and then the markets would fall. And so what can we do with our clients today, though, to alleviate that? How do we circumvent their fears at this time? What do you think we should do, Tim?
Well, I think the public, first of all, they're not educated on this topic of income. And matter of fact, it's probably a revelation to most people that there is an income from an annuity, or there's income from withdrawal methods, et cetera, but people don't really realize that they can actually take income in a form of interest and dividends, and therefore they can maintain ownership of these corporations and stuff, which makes them feel a lot more confident in the days to come.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think people don't know this? I mean, this is back, go back 50 years, people seem to know it. We've forgotten it? I mean, what's happened?
I think so. I think, and not only that, I think a lot of it is the industry is really promoting more of the flock or the herd mentality is still going for the easy way of getting people convinced to buy, the mutual funds or the ETFs. And of course, the ETFs in the last 15, 20 years have grown in popularity. And I think a lot of that is more industry standard today, in my opinion.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's a lot of giving a lot of advisors a permission slip, if you will, to get lazy and not really do money management anymore like you do. So, okay, those types of tools, though, are okay for younger folks. But how far out of retirement do you typically tell people they should at least start philosophically making the change from a growth mindset to a more income mindset? At what point?
Well, of course, a lot of the people that call in, sometimes it can be 3 to 4 years out, or sometimes at the end of this year or whatever. But we find that based on some of the research and studies that I pay attention to, Wade Fowle is somebody I've always followed over the years, and he talks about the sequence of return risk. And I think it should be started at least 10 years or at least before retirement. And then, of course, the 10 years, the first 10 years of retirement, I think they're the most critical.
Yeah, you're actually a little more conservative than me. I say 10 years out as much as, as far as that. So 30 seconds left. People are concerned today about everything going on with COVID and all the uncertainty, elections and so on. Psychologically speaking, what's the best advice you can give our viewers and our listeners to calm those fears, to keep the right mindset moving forward?
Well, I think people should get informed and educated and understand all the tools that are available to them, and not just stay limited in the ideas of their firms and stuff that they're working with. And from a negative side of things, if you grew up in the 1900s all the way for like 60 years there, it was a bad time to be in America, because we had the Spanish flu, which by the way killed 50 million people, and you had the Great Depression. We had all these challenges, but the good news is we did get through all of those those bad times that people face.
So good advice, Tim. Number one, stay positive, focus. We will get through it. And number two, educate yourself. Education's never bad. Thanks so much for being with us, Tim. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for having me.
You stay with us too. We have more coming up in just a moment on the Income Generation. We'll be right back. I'd like to thank my guests, Ed Slott, Andrew Agemy, Tim Sparks, as well as my co-host, Jeff Small, for joining me today on the Income Generation. Most importantly, though, I want to thank you, our new and returning viewers. So whether you like Halloween or not, you certainly can't escape it. Financially speaking, it's second only to Christmas in terms of consumer spending. And as a culture, this is the time of year when we enjoy making scary things less scary. And for the most part, we do that by facing them head on. And that's a good principle to keep in mind while fear and uncertainty around COVID-19 remains a part of our lives. While there's certainly nothing fun about these very real fears, we don't have to be held prisoner by them. We can choose to face them, choose to make the right decisions, follow the right strategies, and help minimize their impact on our lives. And that's true when it comes to fears about the health impacts of the crisis, as well as about financial impacts too. So don't let fear and uncertainty push you into making rash financial decisions on one end, or paralyze you against taking any action on the other. Discuss your retirement timeline and your concerns with your advisor. At the same time, review and revisit your allocation and your overall strategy in the light of the pandemic, and work with your advisor to revise it if necessary. Also, be aware of potential missteps and wrong turns that you could make. Things like stopping your retirement plan contributions or withdrawing from an account unnecessarily. Do everything you can to avoid mistakes. Most importantly, remember that the objective during scary times such as these is not just to get through them, but to put yourself in a good place to achieve your goals and to fully enjoy life when the crisis is over, which they will be. These crises always end. So as always, stay safe and thanks for watching. If you're close to or in retirement and you're concerned about your money, it's essential you stay informed and up to date. And as you know, right here is where you can do it on the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, and we'll see you next week. I'm David Scranton. During my career, I found that most baby boomers have done a great job growing their retirement savings, yet many don't know how to convert their savings into steady income. And that is why I built the Retirement Income Store, to help hardworking Americans preserve their assets and establish steady streams of income.
If you're 55 or older, our free retirement income kit is for you. It's chock full of information you need to know to get steady income during your retirement. Call 866-710-1749, online at theretirementincomestore.com.